Hello viewers, the topic of today's discussion is theory of demographic transition. Demographic transition implies the transition from high birth rates and death rates to low birth and death rates when an economy passes from a pre-industrial economic system to an industrialized economic system. The theory of demographic transition is based on historical interpretation of demographic scenario. It is associated with an American demographer called Warren Thompson. He observed changes in birth rates and death rates in industrialized societies over a period of 200 years. Currently, most of the developed countries are in the stage 3 or stage 4 of the demographic transition model. The majority of developing nations have reached stage 2 or stage 3. In this context, some countries are the major exceptions. These are poor countries of sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East countries including Pakistan, Palestinian territories, Yemen and Afghanistan, which are affected by government policy or civil conflicts. Demographic transition model predicts ever decreasing fertility rates over the period of time. However, recent data show that beyond a certain level of development, the fertility rates begin to increase again. According to demographic transition theory, it is not certain whether industrialization and higher incomes lead to lower population, or if lower population leads to industrialization and higher incomes. In the present day developed nations, demographic transition began in the 18th century and continues even today. On the other hand, in less developed nations, demographic transition started later, and these countries are still at an earlier stage of demographic transition. Phases of demographic transition. The demographic transition involves 4 stages. See figure 1 on the screen. These are discussed as under. First stage. In first stage, death rates and birth rates are high and roughly in balance. This stage is termed as high stationary stage. See figure 1 on the screen. This has happened in pre-industrial phase of an economy. All human populations are believed to have had this balance until the late 18th century. Firstly, this balance in death rates and birth rates ended in Western Europe. Historically, population growth rates were less than 0.05% since the agricultural revolution over 10,000 years ago. Both the birth rates and death rates tend to be very high in this stage and are approximately in balance. As a result, the population growth is typically very slow in first stage of demographic transition. Second stage. In second stage, the death rates drop rapidly in developing countries due to improvements in food supply and sanitation. This has increased the life expectancy and reduced the diseases. There have been improvements in food supply due to selective breeding, crop rotation and improved farming techniques. Besides, there has been improvement in access to technology, basic health care and education. The improvements in public health have reduced mortality. especially childhood mortality. Before the mid 20th century, these improvements in public health were primarily in the areas of food handling, water supply, sewage and personal hygiene. There has also been an increase in female literacy combined with public health education programs in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In Europe, the death rates decline started in the late 18th century in northwestern Europe. It spread to the south and east over approximately the next 100 years. Without a corresponding fall in birth rates, this produces an imbalance in death rates and birth rates. As a result, the countries in this stage experience a large increase in population. This stage is termed as early expanding phase. Third stage. In third stage, birth rate falls due to access to birth spacing, devices like contraception, high wages, more urbanization, decline in subsistence agriculture, increase in women education and their status, decline in the value of children's work, increase in parental investment in the education of children and host of other social changes. As a result, population growth begin to level off. This stage is called late expanding phase. The decline in birth rates started in developed countries in the late 19th century in northern Europe. The improvements in contraception do play a role in birth rate decline. However, contraceptives were not generally available and less used in the 19th century. Therefore, their role in decline in birth rates was not significant. The birth rate has also declined due to change in social and religious values. Fourth stage. In fourth stage, both birth rates and death rates are low. Birth rates may drop to well below replacement level. This leads to fall in population growth rate significantly. This stage is called low stationary phase. This has happened mostly in Germany, Italy and Japan. The shrinking of population has been considered as a threat to many industries that rely on population growth. Death rates may remain consistently low or increase slightly due to increases in lifestyle, diseases due to low exercise levels and high obesity. As a result, the process of an aging population in developed countries has occurred. By the late 20th century, birth rates and death rates in developed countries leveled off at lower rates. Features of the stages of demographic transition. Feature of first stage. In pre-industrial society, death rates and birth rates were both high and fluctuated rapidly. The natural events such as drought and disease were responsible for a relatively constant and young population. Family planning and contraception were virtually non-existent. Birth rates were determined by the ability of women to bear children. Emigration depressed death rates in Europe and the eastern United States during the 19th century. Overall, death rates tended to match birth rates. These rates were often exceeding 40 per thousand per year. Children contributed to the family economy at an early age by carrying water, firewood, caring for younger siblings, sweeping, washing dishes, preparing food and working in the fields. The child rearing cost was very little. There were no education expenses. Thus, the total cost of child upbringing barely exceeded their contribution to the household. Children were the primary form of insurance for adults in old age. Death rates remained high. The population essentially was determined by the food supply. Any fluctuations in food supply tend to translate directly into population fluctuations. Mortality is frequent due to famine. Features of second stage. In this stage, there is a fall in death rates which causes an increase in population. In the 20th century, the decline in death rates tended to be substantially faster. The changes leading to this stage in Europe were initiated by the agricultural revolution of the 18th century. Countries in this stage include developing countries like Yemen, Afghanistan, Bhutan and much of sub-Saharan Africa. It excludes South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Swaziland, Lesotho, Namibia, Kenya and Ghana. These African nations have begun to move into stage 3. The main factors responsible for decline in the death rates were the improvements in food supply due to higher yields in agricultural practices and better transportation, which prevents deaths due to starvation and lack of water. There has been significant improvements in public health which reduced mortality, particularly infant and child mortality. Besides, there have also been improvements in water supply, sewerage, food handling and general personal hygiene due to growing scientific knowledge and the improved education and social status of mother. Due to decline in mortality in stage 2, there is an increasingly rapid rise in population growth, which is termed as population explosion due to wider gap between deaths and births. The population explosion occurs not due to an increase in birth rates, but due to a decline in death rates. This change in population occurred in northwestern Europe during the 19th century due to industrial revolution. During the second half of the 20th century, less developed countries entered stage 2 and created population explosion. Features of stage 3. In stage 3, there is population stability due to a decline in birth rates. In rural areas, there has been decline in childhood deaths. Parents realize that they need not require so many children to ensure a comfortable old age. Parents become increasingly confident that fewer children would suffice to help in family business and care for them in old age. There have been changes in the traditional values placed upon fertility and the value of children in rural society due to impact of urbanization. Urban living also raises the cost of dependent children to a family. In both rural and urban areas, the cost of children to parents is increased by the introduction of compulsory education. Children are increasingly prohibited under law from working outside the household. School going children now need to be clothed and may even require school uniforms. Parents begin to consider it as a duty to buy children books and toys. A major factor in reducing birth rates in stage 3 developing countries such as Malaysia is the availability of family planning facilities. Increasing female literacy and employment lowers the uncritical acceptance of childbearing and motherhood as measure of the status of women. Working women have less time to raise children. Valuation of women beyond childbearing and motherhood becomes important. Improvement in contraceptive technology are now a major factor. Fertility decline is caused as much by changes in values about children and availability of contraceptives and knowledge of how to use them. Features of fourth stage. In the fourth stage, birth rates and death rates are low. Therefore, the total population is high and stable. There is a low death rate due to control of diseases and famines. The food security is assured. The birth rate is low as people have more opportunities to choose if they want children. This is possible by improvements in contraception. Women are gaining more rights, independent and worked as opposed to just bearing children. Some demographers consider that there are only 4 stages of demographic transition. The demographic transition model is only a suggestion about the future population levels of a country. It is not a prediction. Countries in the 4th stage include the United States, Canada, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, European nations, Bahamas, Sri Lanka, South Korea, Iran, China, Turkey, Thailand and Mauritius. Features of 5th stage. The original theory of demographic transition has just 4 stages, but additional stages have been proposed. Both more fertile and less fertile futures have been claimed as a stage 5. Some countries have sub-replacement level of fertility below 2.1 children per woman. European and many East Asian countries now have higher death rates than birth rates. There has been rapid population aging and population decline. In 2009, Ms. Kyla, Kohler and Billeri show a negative relationship between national wealth and birth rates. The economic development promotes fertility decline at low and medium human development levels. At advanced human development levels, fertility rebounds. In many countries with very high levels of economic development, fertility rates are now approaching 2 children per woman, with exceptions of Germany and Japan. Currently, most advanced countries have increased fertility. Rich people are willing and able to convert plentiful resources into plentiful fertile descendants. Experiences of demographic transition. Britain. England experienced the transition from high levels of both mortality and fertility to low levels during 1750 to 1975. This has happened due to the sharp decline in death rate for infectious diseases. The agricultural revolution and the development of transport also led to greater availability of food and coal. The industrial revolution has also caused improvements in the standard of living. The decline in fertility occurred before efficient contraception became available. Ireland. In the 1980s and the early 1990s, the Irish demographic status converged to the European norm. Mortality rose above the European community average. In 1991, Irish fertility fell to replacement level. France. France displays real divergences from the standard model of Western demographic evolution due to its historical cultural values and its internal regional dynamics. France's demographic transition was unusual. The mortality and the fertility decreased at the same time. There was no demographic boom in the 19th century. Asia. In Asia, the demographic change can be seen as a byproduct of social and economic development together with, in some cases, strong governmental pressure. The transition sequence entailed the establishment of an effective, typically authoritarian system of local administration, providing a framework for promotion and service delivery in health, education and family planning. Subsequent economic liberalization offered new opportunities for upward mobility. India. Currently, India is in the later half of third stage of demographic transition with more than 1.23 billion population. India is nearly 40 years behind in demographic transition process compared to European countries. The present demographic transition stage, along with its higher population base, will yield rich demographic dividend in future. Korea. In Korea, income growth and public investment in health caused mortality to fall, which suppressed fertility and promoted education. Industrialization, skill premium and closing gender wage gap further induced parents to opt for child quality. Expanding demand for education was accommodated by an active public school building program. The interwar agricultural depression aggravated traditional income inequality, raising fertility and impeding the spread of mass schooling. Landlordism collapsed in the wake of decolonization. There was consequent reduction in inequality, which accelerated human and physical capital accumulation and economic to grow in South Korea. Russia. In the 1980s and 1990s, Russia underwent a unique demographic transition which is termed as a demographic catastrophe. The number of deaths exceeded the number of births. Life expectancy fell sharply, especially for males. The number of suicides increased. From 1992 to 2014, the number of deaths exceeded the number of births. United States. From 1800 to 1940, there was a demographic shift in United States. In rural areas, there was a shift from high fertility with an average of 7 children born per white woman to low fertility with an average of 2 births per white woman. This shift resulted from technological progress. A 6-fold increase in real wages made children more expensive in terms of foregone opportunities to work. Increases in agricultural productivity reduced rural demand for labor, a substantial portion of which traditionally has been performed by children in farm families. A simplification of the demographic transition model theory proposes an initial decline in mortality followed by a later drop in fertility. The changing demographics of the US in the last 2 centuries did not parallel this model. Critical evaluation. The demographic transition model is only a model and cannot necessarily predict the future. It does however, give an indication of what the future birth and death rates may be for an underdeveloped country together with the total population size. Most particularly, of course, the demographic transition model makes no comments on change in population due to migration. It is not applicable for high levels of development, as it has been shown that after a high human development index of 0.9, the fertility increases again. The main criticisms of the theory demographic transition model is less applicable to least developed nations. Demographic transition model has been validated primarily in Europe, Japan and North America, where demographic data exists over centuries. High quality demographic data for most of least developed nations did not become widely available until the mid 20th century. Demographic transition model does not account for recent phenomena such as mortality due to AIDS, climate change impacts. The demographic transition model also did not include government interventions, for example, one child policy of China. Demographic transition model assumes that population changes are induced by industrial changes and increased wealth. It does not consider the role of social change in determining birth rates. Demographic transition model assumes that the birth rate is independent of the death rate. Nevertheless, demographers maintain that there is no historical evidence for society-wide fertility rates rising significantly after high mortality. The demographic transition model does not explain the early fertility declines in much of Asia in the second half of 20th century or the delays in fertility decline in the parts of the Middle East. Conclusions: demographic transition model presents an idealized picture of population change in developed world. This model is a generalization that applies to developed countries as a group and may not accurately describe all individual cases. The extent to which it applies to less developed societies today remains to be seen. Many countries such as China, Brazil and Thailand have passed demographic transition model very quickly due to fast social and economic change. Some countries, particularly African countries, appear to be stalled in the second stage due to stagnant development and the effects of AIDS. I hope you have enjoyed today's lecture. Thanks for watching.